Welcome at Turning Lessons into Legacy, session number 3 on equitable learning and partnerships. This is the last session in a series of learning sessions that we've been hosting for the last few months at Bartels, which is part of our learning track for strategic partnerships, partnerships funded by the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And as many of these partnerships are coming to an end this year, learning is on the top of everyone's mind. How do we make sure we learn from what we have done? How do we make sure we can share the lessons learned within organizations, but also externally? And how do we make sure that learning is done in an inclusive way and benefits everyone involved? Sil, if you would like to go to the next slide. We have an overview of the series that we've been hosting. We started talking about learning from programs. How can we make sure that the lessons learned in our programs are documented, shared, and also communicated within organizations and to the outside world, and make sure that they are used to improve our work. Then we look more to learning into our organizations. How can we create a learning culture? What strategies are needed to promote learning in our organizations? And yeah, what kind of culture, but also what kind of structures and frameworks are needed? And how do things, for example, like power relations play a role in that? These last 2 sessions, the recaps are on our website. We will share them with you also afterwards if you would like to look back. And today, the last session, we thought we will shift the focus more to learning in partnerships, because learning our work, we don't usually do this alone. We work in partnerships often. And questions that come up throughout all these sessions is who is actually learning and whose knowledge are we including when we are learning, who benefits the learning. And how can we make sure that our commitments to feminist monitoring and evaluation, to decolonizations are actually part of our learning approaches? So this is something, that's the topics, the themes that we will discuss today. On the next slide, we have the objectives of our session for today. We want to focus on how to address why it's important and how we can address power imbalances in learning, and also learn about practical strategies to ensure that all actors meaningfully participate in and benefit from learning. Well, to do that, we have a full program. We have a great panel of experts with us here today. First of all, Gladys Camboy will give us an overview of the framework of epistemic justice and the work that is done on the knowledge management for development community. How can we look at learning from an epistemic justice framework? Then our colleagues from ALNAP, Hannah Abu Hussein and May Albiento, are going to share their paper on locally led evaluation as a specific approach to evaluation. And then we have Sarah and Bitamisi from Akida Mamawa Africa on feminist learning approaches. So we'll have a full overview of different approaches and practical strategies as well on how to ensure that we can learn in an equitable and inclusive way. Most of all, we want to make sure that there's space for conversation today. So we'll have a few presentations, but then also time for talking about this. We would really like to also hear from everyone here in the room how they look at this and what are practical things they would like to explore further. Especially in the current context in which we're working, there's a lot of shifts happening in the international development landscape, and learning might tend to fall off the agenda. Well, I think it might be even more important than ever to ensure that we do this in such a way that everyone benefits, and that we make sure we learn from the work that we do and we can adjust where needed. So in that context, we would like to first get a bit of an impression from everyone here in the room to see how we look at these topics. And for that, I would like to give the word to my colleague Sil, who will take us through a Mentimeter. question.
Yes. Thank you, Anna. I hope you can all see my Mentimeter. For those on the computer, on the PC, you can just join in the Zoom app itself. If you're joining from your phone, please go to menti.com and enter the code that you can see on the screen right now. So I'll give you a moment to join this Menti, and then we'll go to our opening question. All right, you will still be able to see the code on top of the screen here. So we'll go to our question. So why do you think it is important to ensure equitable learning approaches in today's context? So before you hear from us and our presentations, we'd like to hear from you as well. Yeah, and why you think it's important to ensure equitable learning approaches, and especially in today's context. I'll give you a moment to make up your thoughts, write something down. So I see one response already: to allow for real-time adaptation. Okay, to sustain learning over time. Engendering resilience, so we don't get lost in one-way learning or just learning from your own perspective. To develop collective wisdom. Okay, may I ask one of you who submitted these answers to yeah, just explain why you think it's important, and to explain your answer. So to shift towards a goal of learning for localization, not reporting for reporting's sake. The current requires for diverse ways of problem solving, leaning on and including multiple expertise, inclusion of knowledge that has been excluded due to colonial systems. Maybe I might ask the person who wrote to give more space for marginalized voices and make sure that we get better quality collective learning, to explain it, because that seems very interesting to me. And if I'm putting you on the spot and you don't want to talk, that's also fine. No worries.
No, I can speak. I was just
Okay.
no, I think yeah, learning in general, no, has been dominated for so many years by Western knowledge. So if we want to have a more just society, we need to make join, and we can collect we can construct no different narratives and different learnings. And I think it's extremely important not to give space to these voices who have been in the margin for many years. So yeah, that's why I wrote this.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing, Ingrid. Yeah, I see some more answers coming in. To bridge opportunity gaps, to assist with accurate adaptive learning when more perspectives are included, and to take many valuable perspectives into account. So it's also about taking those perspectives into account and ensuring that everybody has equal access to learning and to the approaches and how we give space for that. So thank you for sharing, everyone, sharing your thoughts. Then I think we can go back to the presentation now. So stop the Menti. Go back to the presentation and give the word back to Anna.
Great, thank you, Sil. Some great considerations to already take with us throughout this session, I think. Yeah, I would like to start with our first presentation. So I would like to give the word to Gladys Gamboy, who's currently pursuing her PhD at the University of Illinois and is the Knowledge Cafe leader at KM for Development, or Dev, sorry, KM for Dev. global community of practice, of which she's going to tell us more. So the floor is yours, Gladys.
Thank you so much, Hannah. Thank you, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Gladys Kimboy. I'm from Kenya, and yeah, as Hannah shared, currently in Illinois pursuing PhD in information science, but I'm focusing more on decolonization of knowledge, epistemic justice, and also local and indigenous knowledge. I join here today representing knowledge management for development, which I always say it's my home when it comes to knowledge. Yeah. And I'm more excited to share how we began our journey in decolonization of knowledge and also epistemic justice framework that we have implemented within the communities and also in the academia. Next slide. So this is the journey of KM for Dev. It began way back in 2000. Like now we have 25 years old. I joined the KM for Dev in 2017 when I was doing my master's in information and knowledge management. And I went at a community where I can join to get to learn more knowledge management in the development sector. And I began more getting involved in we met with my mentor, which is Sarah Cummings, who is our KM for Dev leader in 2019 in Nairobi when we had the first Africa Knowledge Partnership. And that conversation was so close to my heart for the first time, kind of like being given a chance to represent our own community. And kind of like KM for Dev has opportunities where you can represent or you can participate to have voice for your own community. You can serve in various, because it focuses more into development sector. And it has global and local actors. It has also core groups where we serve in the leadership, like in the ICT, in the knowledge cafes, where I facilitate the knowledge cafes and have making sure that everyone's knowledge is being heard and represented. So I've been working closely with other leaders, including Rosho. So we have a diverse members of KM for Dev. We usually have monthly knowledge cafes that I'm going to share more about it. And we have volunteers. Membership is always free. No one is being asked for any fee. So we will talk more about it in the next day. Next slide. So KM for Dev has monthly knowledge cafes. It's either being shared based on the members' interested topics, like maybe there's a planning issue in the development sector or at a community level that we would like to address. And as you see, these are the knowledge cafes that we started way back in 2020 when COVID-19 came, and because we could not meet like in person. So we usually meet virtually, organizing the knowledge cafes. And in these knowledge cafes, we had conversation on decolonization of knowledge. And that was in June 2025, June 25 of 2020. What a coincidence that today is June 25, and on June 2020, we had that knowledge cafes at such a time. So we focused more when it comes to the decolonization of knowledge and also the epistemic justice. We were looking at what are those uncomfortable truths that exist. Sometimes when it comes to learning legacies or in the development sector, we still have knowledges that are being excluded, but no one is comfortable to talk about it. As a result of this, we say, okay, what these uncomfortable truths that existed? These also exist at a local level in our own communities, but no one wants to talk about it. It exists in organizations and also in the development sector or either in international development sector. And KM for Dev, we create a safe space where we have that candid conversation on how we can work together to see what is it that is really affecting all of us and how do we address this. Yeah. And the next slide. This is still all about the knowledge cafes. So yeah, so this is our focus when it comes to why decolonization of knowledge. This focuses quite a lot. We focused on like there's a lot of inequalities that still exist in the knowledge systems, in which colonial legacies still excludes local and indigenous knowledges from multiple knowledge systems. This includes like geographical or even social categories. We still have global South, First Nations, indigenous or racialized and local communities. And allow me to speak more that speaks closely to our hearts and representing the communities where I come from. I come from Kenya and I represent the KO community. Colonial legacy still exists within local communities also. You can be excluded because of maybe because of your gender, because of the language sometimes. And that becomes also challenges. And when we talk about colonial legacies, it's not just about the color that, we were colonized by the past colonialists, but right now also colonialists still exist in our own context. So we need to address this and like, how does it affect you, either as an individual, your community, and also the organization within the organization where you have exclusion of indigenous knowledge holders and elders from their own knowledge contribution. It still exists sometimes. We find practitioners where they collect these knowledges, and even when we write reports or people write reports, you realize that those people who gave their knowledges, they are not there, even including about traditional medicine. How do we hold accountable for each other to make sure that these knowledges are included? Yeah. And in the next slide, please. So we began CARE for the Decolonization of Knowledge Framework. This, we launched on May 2023. This was our first 60th generation, focusing on decolonization of knowledge that we launched at Dr. Martin Luther King in the Washington, D.C. And our slogan was, "We have a dream," which was the unifying for the equitable knowledges, making sure, irrespective of where you're coming from, irrespective of the community, like for the first time you realize there are people with their knowledges have not been included. And we have so many diverse communities and existing local and indigenous knowledge. Every community, every tribe in Africa has, but you realize it's only few communities that are being represented. So this focuses on epistemic justice, anti-racism or anti-tribal, if you're coming from Africa. There's indigenous and local knowledge, diversity in KM approaches, and we look at new knowledge partnerships, and then also the new practices. We developed this based on the knowledge cafes and the events that we've been organizing on the uncomfortable truths. And as a result of this, we've been trying to see what are the existing colonial legacy structures that continue to marginalize knowledge from different communities. So this is the KM diversity of KM for Dev. We have representation across the globe. And from the map, you would see how Africa already, we are in the lead, participating and contributing. So these are just the statistics of our Knowledge Cafe participation, but they still are more updated on about our membership. Right now, we have 6,000 members, and yeah, we represent diverse communities. Next slide. So for this, we look at the epistemic justice framework, and I will be talking more about epistemic network, which why epistemic network is more important is we look at how do we create that network supporting systems to make sure that there is fair treatment of knowledge-related practices and making sure that every marginalized voice is being represented and you have an equal voice to represent your own community. Next slide. So this is the epistemic justice framework that we developed with various colleagues across the globe. There's individual, collective levels where we look at testimonial justice. There is also structural, which I'll be talking more, I've already discussed about the network justice, and the systematic. Under systematic, we look at the linguistic justice. Sometimes we have members or communities who have being excluded because of their language. Language is a barrier because sometimes, like when we are sharing in language that other members may not understand, becomes a barrier. English language and our own local people understands also, like may not, or when you translate becomes something different. So as a result of that, we had to work on how can we counter interact with these biases in the knowledge systems. And there's decolonization of knowledge that we have already discussed about it. And now curriculum justice, that also, how do we ensure that we're including this in the curriculum? And happy to share that so far, our university has already embraced this framework. We used it in developing the toolkit that now we're looking forward to work with the communities and training more, especially the community champions that they are representing their communities. Next. So this is the action plan on how we are engaging in various decolonization of knowledge, epistemic justice. We include more people, they see more young people, and we have various mentorship programs. Next. So as members, we have a member action plan on how you're decolonizing knowledge and also epistemic justice. Like part of it still includes how we speak about decolonizing language, celebrating what we have as a community, and we're encouraging communities to share what we have, share the outputs with the locals, and also being ambassadors of your own community and being loud and proud because you already have a space to share. So this is the member action plan, and that is me. And on the left side, and on the right, that's another librarian from Kenya, and that's an elder from our communities that we've been working closely, making sure that we are mapping and documenting these knowledges and engaging elders, community champions in digitizing, preserving these knowledges. We also are initiating partnership with local radio stations to disseminate this kind of information. And knowledges, and also fostering knowledge exchange across villages in various communities. So yeah, I have a question, like what is the relevance of the decolonization of knowledge in your own context? And I'm so excited and looking forward to having further conversation on how we can collaborate moving forward. Over to you, Hannah.
Great, thank you, Gladys. Maybe we can pose the question that you just posed in the chat. What's the relevance of decolonization of knowledge in your own context? So we can also think about this. I would like to open the floor to see if there's any questions for you, first of all. If you have any questions for Gladys, feel free to open your microphone and ask a question, or share your question in the chat. Right. Maybe I can ask if anyone in the room would like to reflect on the question that Gladys posed. What is the relevance of decolonization of knowledge in your own context? What is coming up for you? All right, we have the question in the chat. I see giving credit where it's due. Great. Let's, I think this is something to think about, and we can come back to this after the presentations in the panel. Maybe we'll have some more thoughts about this. It will come back in the next presentations as well. We'll share the slides with you afterwards, so you can also check out all the links and see how you can join KM for Dev. Thank you, Gladys. I would like to move on to our next presentation on locally led evaluation. For this, we have May Albiento, Research Officer at ALNAP. She previously worked as an evaluation and research consultant for international NGOs in the Philippines. And she has a academic background in psychology, public policy, and development evaluation and management. And then also Hannah Abu Hussein, an independent consultant and registered auditor with expertise in accountability, evaluation, and learning. And she most recently held a senior research officer role at ALNAP, where she focused on the locally led evaluation and network engagement. That's my introduction. I would like to give the floor to May and Hannah.
Thanks, Anna. Hi, everyone. I'm May Albiento. I'm a researcher at ALNAP and based in Manila, Philippines. First of all, thanks everyone for joining today, and thank you as well to the Partas team for inviting us to present our paper and also our thoughts on the role of evaluations in promoting learning in partnerships. So together with me is my colleague Hannah, who is the lead author of the paper we'll be sharing about today. So this, can you go to the next one? Our paper, Advancing Locally Led Evaluations, Practical Insights for Humanitarian Context. So you can download the paper through the QR link in the slide. And if you're interested to listen to previous discussions on this topic, you can check out recordings of our Learning Curve event and our recent local event, which Hannah will be sharing the links to these events in the chat. So for this session, we wanted to focus our attention to three things. One is on the role of evaluation in the context of partnerships. Second, we'll share the framework we developed for understanding locally led evaluation based on our paper. And then third, we'll take you through some questions to help you think about your next steps if you want to pursue or strengthen your practice of locally led evaluations. To start us off, let's hear what one of our key informants for the paper had to say about the current practice of evaluations. Please play.
There's been so much conversation about decolonizing, about localization, but when you actually look at it from a local practitioner's point of view, from us who are doing the evaluations, asking the research, it doesn't really translate beyond the research papers, beyond the webinars. Because at the end of the day, the language is still the same and the power centers are still the same. Maybe the needle has moved, but it has moved within the same radius. There's been so much conversation about
Thank you. My line
Over to you, Hannah.
Thanks, May. My line just dropped, so I hope that it will stay put now. I live in Italy, but we have heat waves, and it reminds me of the electricity cuts in Lebanon these days because everyone's turning their air conditioning. So excuse me if that happens. So we'll be covering a little bit about evaluation in the context of partnerships. We had a look at our paper and tried to think about how we could join it up well to this event. So thanks for inviting us to do that. Next slide, please. I wanted to go over a few different points around evaluation that can tie these topics together. The first one is around power and stigma. And I think that a lot of those of us who have been involved in evaluations in some way, whether in the evaluator role or as one of the decision makers who uses evaluators or someone interviewed by an evaluator, etc., you may already have felt that evaluation can be loaded with stigma, and it can be associated with policing, with accountability, more so than a learning exercise very often. And evaluators come with a lot of power, and the amount of money that's spent on evaluations, the time and the energy that goes into evaluations, and the fact that they have decision makers' ear and they can influence decisions brings with it a lot of power. So you're already starting with an exercise that can be a difficult one to look at in terms of power dynamics. So often if an organization is not already on the path of partnership policies that promote equitable partnership, dialogue around design and participation, decision-making that looks at where power is held, and then you need to pay particular attention to how evaluations are viewed and how they're used and whether they're able to promote more equitable partnership instead of emphasizing inequity. And the next point I wanted to make here, oh, sorry, if you can go back again. Yeah, that there's a context around this that also influences how evaluations play out. It could be the environment, like what was mentioned before, what's changing in the international development context, in the emergencies, in the humanitarian context, in an organization's culture or in the culture of a population and how they view exercises around accountability and learning in the first place. In the stakeholders themselves, are they open to speaking and giving feedback in general, or are they a very reserved culture? And in the wider aid sector. So as was mentioned by Anna earlier, there's a lot of different things that are currently pressing on the larger aid sector. There's funding cuts, there's prioritization of programs, and there's very little money to go around. So more and more decision-making around what gets asked by who's involved will have to take place, and makes exercises like evaluation a particularly powerful place and a place of opportunity where you can tilt some of this balance and make evaluations part of more equitable practices and partnerships. And now you can go ahead. So this was a particularly meaningful quote, I thought, from one of our key informants, Zaki Ullah of Glow Consultants in Pakistan, about partnerships, essentially. And he said, when we say that we're having equal partnerships, for me, the test is very simple. The test is at the end of your research, just think about the whole research exercise and whether there was any part where there was a difference of opinion between the international partner and the local partners. And if in any case, the local partners' views prevailed. And that was just a very simple framing of how many times we're not even looking for a difference of opinion, or we're not opening a space for a difference of opinion. And there can be many different contexts where it would be valuable to do so. And in fact, we should be led by the local partner's opinion. Next slide, please. So here I'll pass over to May to take us through the framework for understanding locally led evaluation from our paper.
Thanks, Hannah. If you could go to slide, please. Based on our analysis of the documents we reviewed and the conversations we had with different evaluation practitioners through the key informant interviews, as well as the scoping webinars we did. So we developed this conceptual framework that illustrates how we understand a locally led evaluation. And let me just take you briefly through the components of the framework. It's a bit small for you to read, so you can probably just download the paper from our website if you want to take a look and read through the different components here. But at the core of this framework are the 4 principles that we found common to similar themes we reviewed. So we reviewed similar themes such as participatory and community-led approaches, decolonizing evaluation, culturally responsive and indigenous evaluations, as well as knowledge and evidence generation. And the 4 principles that stood out from all of these themes include: 1, engaging in ongoing self-reflection and reflexivity, so thinking through our positionality throughout the process. And this is part of what we're inviting all of you to do today. The second is around putting the leadership and ownership of local stakeholders, that would be local evaluators or the communities themselves at the center, so that they can define their own goals and priorities in the evaluation process. Third is around recognizing the validity of local knowledge systems and ways of knowing. And fourth is around promoting justice and equity, particularly in partnerships among evaluation stakeholders. So these four principles for us represent what local-led evaluation could look like at a minimum when thoughtfully implemented. And yeah, they speak a lot about how we view ourselves and the stakeholders we engage with throughout the evaluation process. So next to the principles, we outline some practical steps that evaluation stakeholders can take to start or strengthen their ways of working in evaluations. So you can see them as long-term strategies and immediate actions, and we'll go later into those into examples of these practical steps. On the outermost layer, you'll see the value of local data evaluation, and these are based from the experience that the key informant interview shared with us. And just to give you some examples of the so what for doing locally led evaluation. And just to name a few, some of those that they mentioned include like having localized results or being more learning oriented or having more relevant and meaningful findings for the local communities. And then on the left side, you will see that we highlight the different stakeholders involved in the process. And here we recognize that stakeholders can hold multiple roles and hold different levels of power throughout the process. On the right side are a list of some of the debates and barriers to local data evaluation, and Hannah already referred to some of them earlier. So essentially, this framework invites us to rethink and recalibrate our practice of partnerships and evaluations. Why do we do them? For who? And with who? And how? So that's what we're inviting you all today to think through as well. Next slide. So before we dive into the practical steps to locally led evaluations, I'd like to share what an independent evaluator we spoke to suggested as a key step in advancing locally led evaluation. So Catherine said, start building institutional awareness and understanding about the value of localizing M&E approaches with the organizations you work with. So as an independent evaluator working with organizations, we also have a role to play in advancing locally led evaluation practices and approaches. And this she sees as a first step towards cultural change of institutions, towards accepting and adopting these localized approaches. So it's not just organizations themselves who can change practices. It's not just communities who can rally to be included in evaluations, but also as independent evaluators ourselves. We can also be part of that call to action to practice more locally led evaluations. And so I'll turn it over to Hannah to share some of the practical insights that we've thought about.
Thanks, May. And I realize we might already be going over, so do feel free to put your questions in the chat and we'll try and get through these quickly. So in terms of the long-term strategies, there are three main ones that we highlight, and there are many different components under each. We thought to just give you a quick taste of what they look like. The first on shaping evaluation culture, policies, and strategies. Many organizations I've met through LNAP or that I've audited have very strong decolonization culture that goes across their work, or they have strategic priorities on locally led response, or they will have adopted very cultural and context sensitive approaches in their programming. And then they shift this into how they look at evaluation. So very often this is kind of the order that we see things happening in, but it doesn't mean that if there's a weak strategy, policy, or culture, that evaluations shouldn't still consider as much as they can different locally led approaches. So it just seems to be a pattern, and people draw strengths from the larger organizations and the examples they see around them. And I'll just give a quick, maybe for developing know-how, this is more about mutual learning and capacity strengthening, but I'll give a quick example as well of establishing and maintaining critical relationships. So I'm part of my National Lebanese Evaluation Association. And as a quick example, a parliamentary member was drawing on the expertise of our National Evaluation Association to inform the strengthening and the establishing of an M&E system for the Parliament's work. And there's many different ways that we can draw on partnerships and make equitable partnerships by viewing one another's contribution in more equitable ways and making sure that those marginalized voices are heard through one avenue or another. Next slide, please. Maybe we can skip over this, May, and just take them to our. So we'll share slides if others are interested, but we'll take you through straight into our practical steps.
Yeah, so we've also suggested in the paper some practical steps and examples that stakeholders can immediately start doing. So if the long-term strategies can take a long time to come into fruition, so you can actually do some immediate steps, and we've mapped them onto the stages in evaluation from the planning, implementation, and the using of the findings, so to make it easier for anyone to incorporate in ongoing or upcoming exercises. So for example, in the planning stage, examples of what commissioners can do, for example, is including language requirements or having the presence of team members who is knowledgeable in the language and culture of the communities in the TORs. Another component could be like allocating funding for doing conversations with communities during the data collection, as well as in the reporting and use. And in the implementation stage, it's not just, involving communities just as sources of information, but also engaging them in making sense of the findings and even thinking through recommendations through sense-making workshops or validation workshops at the community level. And I've found this very useful as well in making sure that the findings are really relevant and the recommendations also come from their end, thinking about, sustaining the initiatives from their end, not just from an external perspective or from the organization itself. And in the implementation stage, it's not just it could look like involving communities in planning and implementing dissemination events of evaluation results. And for international evaluators working with local evaluators, maybe that could look like sharing authorship with the local evaluators, because sometimes we've heard some local evaluators saying that they're just doing, the data collection and not involved in analysis or writing the results. So international evaluators could also consider involving the local evaluators in analyzing and writing the results as well. So in the paper, you'll find resources and linked examples of how others have tried various ways of action to incorporate these practices in their evaluation. And then next slide, Hannah.
Yeah, so we wanted to just end with inviting you to self-reflect on 3 questions that link to these longer-term strategies. And those questions are posted here. We invite you to think from whatever perspective you're operating in, whether you're a consultant or you're a part of an organization, whether you have partners that are modeling interesting examples or opportunities where strategic commitment, policies, or organizational culture can positively influence your own approach, because very often that's how we learn, through the example of others, through how another department is doing things, through how this excellent colleague is managing her evaluation practice, etc. Second, how do the local partners you may be working with understand their insights from the community? Are you even taking the time potentially to actively listen and learn from the local partners on how they record knowledge and they draw on communities' existing practices around this. And finally, is there any way you can dedicate more time and effort to spending time with communities? Because it starts there. You don't know what their priorities are and what questions they want to ask if you're not taking any time to understand that well from them. And you'd be surprised how very often that gets missed. We deliver service, we deliver goods, and we don't actually listen to anything that's being said. And yeah, so maybe we can wrap up here, and I see some interesting questions already that I'm very happy to answer. Do you want to go to the next slide, please?
So for our last slide, if you want to engage with us further, you can join our Emilia LinkedIn group. The link in the QR code is there in the slide. And we want to invite you all to join the group and start a conversation. You can post questions there or share examples of locally led evaluation and just meet like-minded professionals who are interested in learning more about how we advance locally led evaluations. We also have some M&E resources on our website, so you can also take a look at that. And if you have any suggestions or you want to engage more with us, please send us an email. And the email address that's also there on the screen. Thanks so much, everyone, for listening.
Great. Thank you, May and Hannah, for this insightful presentation. As you said, there's already a few questions in the chat. I think if you would be able to answer them in the chat, and maybe the question, I see something about, the donor requirement. Maybe this is something we can discuss after all the presentations as well, because I think it's a big, it's sort of an elephant in the room that keeps on coming back as well. So let's keep that in mind. Thank you also very nice that you invite us also for some self-reflection. I think it's also really interesting to see how we can, well, first of all, learn from what we're hearing, but also reflect on our own work. I think this is something we'll come back in the next presentation as well. For that, let me just open my screen here. Our next presentation is from Sarah Nanyondo Okello, Head of Programs, and Nyakato Bitamisi Henrietta, the Meal Coordinator of Akina Mama wa Afrika, a Pan-African feminist organization. And to start with, I think we have a little reflection question for all of us here in the room to kind of really make the switch towards learning. So if we can see the next slides. Think of a time you truly learned something powerful, not from a report, but from your experiences. From your experience, what made that learning possible and what made it a learning for you? Kind of start to think about what is learning and what makes it possible. So feel free to think about this and share your reflections on the chat. We don't have time for 5 minutes of reflection, but take a minute. And then I would like to give the word to Sarah Bitamisi.
All right, thank you so much, Anna. And as people do share their reflections in the chat, I'll just briefly talk about who we are and what Akina Mama does. Next slide, please. Let's keep the reflections coming. Thanks, Anna. Next slide, please. All right. To take us through this presentation is myself, as introduced by Anna. That is, I'm Sarah Nanyondo Okello, and I serve as the head of programs at Akina Mama wa Afrika, and my colleague Bitamisi, who will introduce herself later on in the presentation. And at office, we are known as the dynamic duo, because we did establish the M&E department at Akinamama, and being a feminist organization, we tasked ourselves to try out feminist practice around M&E, because like someone mentioned in the audio that was shared previously, that a lot has been said, a lot of theory is coming together, but what does it look like in practice? So we have interesting practical successes and practical failures that I call learning points for us to keep sharpening M&E practice. Next slide, please. So briefly about Akinamama or Africa. Akina, we sometimes refer to it as Akina because Akinamama is such a long name. Akina was formed 40 years ago in the UK by a group of African women who found the need to come together, share their experiences, share their lived realities as African women that were living in the diaspora. But after some time of organizing and feeling a sense of connectedness as individuals, they felt a need to reconnect to their roots. So they did decide to move Akina from the United Kingdom back to the soil in Africa. So in 1996, Akinamama got a home in Africa, and that was in Uganda. And until to date, that is where our headquarters are, in Uganda, but we do work across the African continent. We have consultative status with the African Union, the UN Economic and Social Council, and other regional and global bodies. And this year we mark 40 years of existence. It's both an exciting milestone, but also a challenge for us. Our work is deeply rooted in our values as a feminist organization. We take concepts like decolonization serious, social justice serious, because we envision a dignified and equitable society for all African women in their diversity, and whatever fits into that frame is what we stand for as an organization. Our work spans across 3 thematic areas. That is advancing women's political leadership, ensuring that Pan-African feminist agendas are advanced in decision-making spaces. We also recognize the current economic and climate crisis. So we advance feminist alternatives as viable solutions for economic development. And with the current context where we see the rise of fundamentalism, conservatism, we are very keen on advancing agency, voice, and choice on sexual reproductive health and rights through our SRHR program. So briefly, that's who we are as an organization, and we are dreaming for what the next decade will look like for us. Next slide, please. So the concept of learning is part of how we define ourselves as an organization. And I'll hand over to my colleague Bitamisi to just share with us on what we have defined it internally in simple terms to be relatable. Over to you, Bitamisi.
Thank you, Sarah. Good afternoon, friends from Kampala. It's warm here. Yeah, and welcome to this conversation once again about equitable learning, and we are going to look at what feminist learning looks like for us. Excuse me, as a feminist organization that is very, very intentional about learning. We believe that there is not just one definition that we can use to define learning, but we use definitive words to speak to particular moments within our learning curve. And as you can see, the slide before you has different words of how we perceive learning, of how we define learning. We have it being a dialogue, having a learning, feminist learning, helping us getting a time of reflection, exploration. It gives us a chance to unlearn. We take time to stop and notice what is around us. Feminist learning involves listening, being very, very intentional with listening, but it's also an accountability tool for us as individuals and for those that are around us. We see learning being very relational, and learning never stops. It's an iteration. Yeah, we can't say we've learned today and then we stop. Yeah, it's always continuous. We do acknowledge feelings when we are talking about learning. There's embodiment. There is the lived reality. There's co-creation, because learning is very, very participatory, and it is also dependent on the context that we do work with. I know we may have other definitions or other terms that we use to define feminist learning. I invite all of us to use the chat and post them there to share with us your ideas of what learning is, what feminist learning is. And we also believe that feminist learning is not just about acquiring knowledge, but it is about co-creating meaning, holding space for complexity. It is about transformation for both self as well as the systems that we work with through care, through curiosity, through collective wisdom. Next slide, please. As Akina Mama, we are very privileged to be part of 3 partnerships which are funded by the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And learning has been part of us, and we are part of learning. So there are values that have emerged as we go about learning within the partnerships that we are part of. And they are listed here in the slide. That is the first value, being attentive, being present, voice and agency, autonomy, embracing heterogeneity, and then there is shared ownership. When we look at the value around attentive or being present, we are very intentional with the partners we work with to make sure we create an environment that allows for oneself to be fully present in a place, the body, the mind, the soul to be very present in a place. We acknowledge emotions, and we also need to be very attentive when we are conducting learning spaces to the voices that are being heard, to the voices which are not being heard, and the voices that are also overshadowing others. And that leads us to the second value, which is around voice and agency. And these two relate to empowerment. And we see that voice gives the platform for partners to be in position to express themselves, for them to feel heard. And we don't only stop at giving our partners the ability to speak, but we also involve them in making decisions. For example, we see that when you're working in partnerships, you're distributed in different countries. There's the different time zones that come into place. So agreeing on when learning activities, for example, would be taking place is very crucial. So that's why it's really important that those that are part of your learning have a say in the co-creation, in the planning of the entire learning process. There is also the third value, which is around autonomy related to independence, the feeling of having independence. Partners need to feel that they are not coerced in any way to say certain things. There should be freedom. And we also acknowledge that when you're working in a partnership, every organization is at a different journey of learning. So it is important to pick those different experiences to inform your learning journey when you're working together in a partnership. So we also see the other value being heterogeneity, and this allows for diversity in humans, but also for ideologies. I mean, when you're working as a collective, you come in with different varying values, and your desires to learn are different. So feminist learning should be in position to allow for that diversity of ideas, of people, of organizations, of localities, and all that. And finally, we have the value around shared ownership. And this, speaking to the last slide, we said that part of the things that define feminist learning is co-creation. Learning is a participatory process. And we see that when we bring partners together, so for example, for the partnerships that we belong to at the start of implementing the programs that we were part of, we were very intentional with making sure that people or organizations contribute to, say, the development of tools, the development of the theory of change, the development of the results framework. And what we have seen over a period of time, but at the time of assessing the work that we've been able to do, we've seen ownership of the results that come from these 3 projects. Yeah, that is it for the values. I will invite Sarah to take us to the next slide. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Bitamithi. So as an organization, we noticed that we are learning differently within our partnerships. We come together, sometimes it's same values, similar aspirations, but like Bitamithi mentioned, we are always at different journeys as institutions, as persons that are doing this work, and also the evolution of our strategies as we do our work. And the commonest approach to learning that we have experienced is the linear, which most oftentimes we talk about through evaluations, which is deeply planned, aligned to strategic periods or aligned to program proposals, has clear learning questions and learning agenda. This helps with structure, it's easily trackable, and allows for forecasting sometimes. But we also noticed that given the work that we do as an organization that deals with complex issues, this type of learning was limiting us in many ways. So we focused our attention on the learning approach that feeds into the work that we do. That is the emergent learning approach that allows us to be flexible, that allows us to be fluid with our work, and also allows us to shape what we are doing alongside the context within which we are operating in. Because we all know that with social justice work, today may be different from tomorrow. The results that you see today are always different from what happens tomorrow. But this type of learning has some discomforts. You have to be open to ambiguity, but also you have to be open to sharing power, which is a common feminist principle, because it challenges what you know, how you got to know it, and why you think it's the truth. Next slide, please. So as an organization, we want to share a practical way in which we have done this based on a case study. Quickly, I will go through it, and then we will generate insights and welcome questions and ideas. First of all, with emergent learning, the first stage is curiosity. At Akina Mama, we have a flagship program that we have run for 28 years now. That is the African Women's Leadership Institute. And at the offset of the pandemic, we saw things change with the way the institute was running or the results that were coming out of the institute. So we were curious and asking ourselves, is it because of the pandemic? Is it because of how the world has evolved? What is it that we need to know? We were noticing low responses in surveys, because oftentimes when we think of learning, you put out a survey. Each time you think of what is happening, you do a study to find out what was happening. But all those were giving us responses that we felt were not answering the questions that we had. Feedback was fluctuating and not making a lot of sense. So what did we do? We allowed ourselves to listen without defense. And that listening meant we made ourselves vulnerable. We opened ourselves up to the people we were serving, that is our partners with whom we were working with, the alumni that we were targeting in the ecosystem, and we had honest conversations around what was happening. Not necessarily structured, because we recognized that every person we reached out to viewed the challenge from their perspective. So we did a selection and had one-on-one honest conversations. Then secondly, we decided to revisit her history, cross-checking to see what is it that happened 2015, 28 years ago that we need to be aware of to shape the changes that we are seeing, or to shape the new direction, to shape the thinking, to shape the dream that we have for this institute. That history revealed a lot of things, a lot of unknowns. And this was seated in our archives. This was seated with people that have gone through the organization, but also it was seated with partners with whom we have worked with for a very long time. Then internally, we recalibrated who carries the role and responsibility of learning. Oftentimes, we run to the M&E team because they carry the position that, oh, M&E, what are you saying? What are the what insights are coming out? Before joining Akina Mama, I worked with USID, and we had a person in charge of learning. I used to sympathize with that person because each time we had a reporting cycle, he had a learning section to fill in, and it was always a struggle. What is it that they have to write? So we are internally based, recognizing and recalling that experience from my previous workplace and what you were saying, the dynamics of how learning was happening. We decided that this is a role for everyone. Everyone can shape it, everyone can reimagine it, and everyone has something to contribute. And in there, we were decolonizing roles and also rethinking how knowledge is actually collected and reported. We also centered the lived experiences of the people that are actually doing this work. We did not hurry to say that, oh, let's get an evaluator to come and actually, think, do for us, get what is happening, what is working, what is not working. No, we centered experiences, we centered realities, we centered what partners, modalities of working, and everything. So after doing all that background work, then we convened internal learning spaces. This is where these were safe spaces for us to name our fears, dream, reimagine, and form collective position for adaptation. After that internal cohesion, this is within our ecosystem, the partners, the alumni, and the staff. Then we took it to the external to tell them, friends, this is what we are learning as us, the people that carry this work. Can you learn with us? What is it that you're doing? And the people we reached out to are people that are doing similar work, or people that have a dream to do the similar work, or people that have watched us to do this. And that helped us expand our vision, expand our adaptation approaches, and also, develop theory around what practices actually work. So for us as an organization, we recognize intentional learning, but we realigned it along pre-planned processes and evaluations, and allowed the emergent learning to inform our real-time adaptations. So thank you. I'll stop there and hand over to Anna.
Great, thank you so much. There's so much to tell, but very interesting to see this approach of emergent learning, and what you said, that learning can also be uncomfortable. This is something we saw in the comments here as well, that when thinking of a time that you really learn something, it's not always comfortable. It's when you go out of your comfort zone, when you experience something new. And it's an interesting, it's a good realization, I think. I would like to provide some space for questions. I see some questions in the chat already as well. Maybe to go back to the question that was mentioned earlier, that was asked earlier, like one of the barrier is often rigid requirements from donors. With regards to evaluations, with regards to learning, how can we influence this, and how can we deal with this, and how can we balance this with our learning approaches? Hannah already answered something on the chat, but maybe would you like to expand on this a bit?
Do you want me to expand, or give a chance to have
Yeah, we can. Yeah, sure. No, maybe just short, how you
sure.
look at this. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we recognize that a lot of people will often find that this is a huge barrier. So in our research as well, we try to speak to different parties who represent either funding agencies or, very big organizations that will commission evaluations, even if they're not donor agencies themselves. And the conversation is often around, like, speaking directly to them. It's about, what kind of culture is already there in the organization. And very often you'll find that there's sort of a policy around evaluation, and we do evaluations this way, or we do learning this way, and we need you to answer these questions, and we need you to fill out these reporting templates. And there isn't much of the, what do you need? And what does the community you're working with need? And how can we make the process of you engaging with us easier and simpler so that it matches what you need to do? But speaking also just from direct experience, when I was working in a country office in Lebanon, I found it a lot easier to communicate directly with my counterparts in funding agencies than what it may seem. I think we often have this kind of image of a funding agency or a focal point or a big agency that's commissioning the evaluation, or whoever it is. If you're an independent consultant, whoever is your employer, we have this impression that, oh, you can't change what's written in the terms of reference. You can't change what impression the donor has in their mind. The context now is such that you can change anything. You have an excellent argument for locally led approaches, for local knowledge systems, for using local people. The sector is primed for this, but also you never know if you don't start the conversation, if you don't try to introduce at least one question that is a learning question for the community, directed at for the local partners, directed at them, with them as the audience, with them as the leaders, with them as the decision makers. You have to try and insert those opportunities wherever possible. It can be as simple as building in consultation points or an extra budget line for spending time in that community, or making sure someone on the team is a local evaluator or from that community, making sure the language, it's going to be shared in a variety of languages that make it accessible, making sure that it uses criteria that makes sense to the people involved. So there's many, many different ways. I know we don't have a lot of time, but happy to continue the conversation and hope that helps a little.
Thank you. Sarah, Vitamisi, Gladys, would you like to respond to this as well? Right. Any other questions in the room right now? Feel free to raise your hand or write it in the chat.
Anna, is it okay if I can respond on funding aspect?
Of course.
Yeah, because thank you so much, Laura, for bringing that conversation when it comes to funding. Yeah, I've worked closely with communities at local level and also with the global level. Sometimes we experience this, and these are the uncomfortable truths that we rarely speak, and we need to have our own candid conversation. When you hold the accountable the partners at the local level, they like shortcuts. Great that you brought in the aspect of first receipts. Some do, some they don't. And there's also the challenge where how do we balance the issue of when we have donor funding or when working with funding projects. This is where people will say this is our own money, but it is not your own money when we're working within the projects. And this is, so it becomes a lot of challenging when it comes issues on accountability. And other thing that also funding projects, or even when we engage in collaborative works, systems keeps on changing, and some systems might favor the locals, which also some systems might become a barrier to the global partners, like when you want to work closely, because it's so difficult. Whom do you trust when it comes to such aspects? And I would love to hear from our other African partners, how have they engaged it and making sure who is the right person or who is the right partner that you work with at the local level, and ensuring accountability. They start issue of trust without putting nepotism, because those are part of the colonial legacies that still exist. Nepotism still exists. People put their own relatives as long as they're going to benefit from these projects. And they leave now, exclude the right people that needs to benefit from, the right people that have contributed their own either knowledges, either learnings, but they don't benefit at the end of the day. Thank you.
Thank you. I see another question in the chat from May. Well, a lot of times during learning exercises, staff might be uncomfortable talking about failures for fear that this might affect their performance reviews. And well, what we mentioned earlier, of course, it can be uncomfortable as well to talk about these things. So how do you take this into account? How do you encourage them to talk about failures or challenges? Sarah, would you like to answer to this?
Yeah, sure. Sure, and I would also want to touch on the issue of funding. I think all these conversations need to happen within, we cannot have isolated conversations talking about decolonizing knowledge, decolonizing M&E, delinking it from decolonizing funding, because it is a chain of things that we really, really need to boldly talk about, because if our work is still ingrained in philanthropic approaches that will limit how far we can go without decolonizing, then we will keep saying these things. But like I mentioned, we also need to be very daring and put, like for me as someone working in an African organization based in the Global South, sometimes we put forward what we would desire. If we have an opportunity to speak with a funder, we put forward what we would want to be funded, even if they do have other priorities. We draw linkages, but center our needs and realities and see if they can pivot or we can find a point of convergency. Not necessarily for us to always and always and always. It's very difficult, but I think we're at the point where we need to be very daring and also ask. For the question around learning and fears and letting people open up, we as an organization, like I said, we have allowed ourselves to try and fail. We also there are certain things we link to performance appraisals, but also there are certain things that we have been intentional to integrating into how we operate as an organization. So learning is a principle. So even in our appraisals, we have a question that challenges, what did you learn? You know, what were your curiosity areas as you were doing this work? So our performance is not tied to I did A, B, C, D, I got A, B, C, D results. We appreciate that it's the process. In addition to delivering, this is also a growth journey. So there's limited fear around, if I say this, then it's something that makes it seem like I failed. But also, we have attached this learning to processes within the organization. For example, we do have quarterly reportings where people write what they've learned. So it is not coming off as an individual. So if team A writes about it, team B writes about it, then we sit back and say, this is a recurring lesson. This is something we need to talk about as a group. We give people different questions, and how we do it is we decentralize it. If there's a common learning point, we generate mini questions that everyone interacts with, and then everyone comes and shares in the collective. So within the sharing, people start opening up to, oh, I also interfaced this, I've seen this, I tried this and also failed. So it's but it has been built over time. This is not where we were in 2021 when we started it. No, it's been a journey and people have started getting comfortable. I'll share just one example. I was having a conversation with one of the managers yesterday, and I was very shocked when we were discussing areas of partnerships, what her fears are, what other challenges have been. And the one thing she mentioned was, it is sad that we've not had a learning circle on partnerships this year, because I would have shared my fears, my challenges with a bigger group earlier on than at this time when most partnerships are winding up. So we've gotten to that point where people look at it as a point of, I'm going to be supported with ideas on how to deal with this, as opposed to it will be attached to how I'm performing as an individual.
Thank you. Very nice to hear that you also get this feedback that people really are waiting for these learning circles and are appreciating it. All right. We're almost out of time. To close, I would like to ask our panelists. We've talked about a lot of aspects of learning, of evaluations, of knowledge systems. A lot of ideas and approaches. If you would give advice to all the participants in the room today, like where to start, what is one thing they could do to start making learning more inclusive, more working towards decolonization of learning, feminist learning, locally led? What would be your advice? Very short answer. Can I start with Gladys? Or yeah, Gladys.
Thank you so much, Hannah. One thing that I would share with our participants is that just to be open and be in that community that they will support you, whatever ideas that you have, because I love what came for them has been really of great support to all of us. I come from Kenya. I met with people who are in the global space. They've been very supportive. You have those ideas like, okay, this is how I want to represent my community. So it's a safe space where you don't fear to share what you think, and you're being given support irrespective of where you're coming from. And don't be scared about what you have in mind. And also use what works for you, because sometimes you want to use other scientific systems, but it's not working for you. I'm sharing this from the local aspect, so use what works, and always build that support system, like partnerships. Partnering with local and global partners is key for us to achieve sustainable learning in our organizations and communities. Over to you.
Thank you. Bitamisi?
Yeah, thank you, Anne. Thank you for the reflective question. For me, I have to say that for learning to thrive in an organization or in a partnership, it thrives under safety, and safety goes beyond the physical safety to psychological safety. By the time someone or an organization or anyone representing an organization has to say anything, they have to feel safe within. Yeah, that's my point or contribution.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Hannah, can I ask you?
Yes, sure. I would say, I mean, this is a bit my philosophy in any work that at least I do, is to view one another as human beings and to listen to one another's points of view. It depends, obviously, who you are and the scenario we're imagining. But if I'm the local partner, then I really need to find ways to push for that leadership, and that can't be easy. But if I'm on the other side of the table, am I really listening, and am I really appreciating all the value and the knowledge and the good ideas that can come from the people who know best, the people who are there, the people who are living it? So I would just find any opportunities to start.
Great. Sarah, what would be your advice?
Thank you. My last advice would be, for us to truly decolonize knowledge, decolonize M&E and learning, and also decolonize, conventional practices, we need to dare to try and test out practically some of these things so that we rewrite what practice is, we theorize them, and also present them as viable, practical solutions for everyone to try out.
Thank you. And to close, May, what would be your advice?
I think for me, it's the first step is really around reflecting at your own current practice and scanning maybe your work and your sphere of influence to see and seeing how you can incorporate even like small, simple actions and solutions towards these barriers to equitable learning and partnerships with communities that you work with other partners that you work with. I think that's where we can all start. And then from there, building linkages with others who are also on that same journey to to making sure that the partnerships that we have, the actions that we do in M&E reflect equitable learning and partnerships.
Thank you. Well, I have nothing to add to that. Thank you so much. I think there's a lot of food for thought here, a lot of conversations to still be had. But for now, I really want to thank all of our speakers for joining us here today. We were joined from Manila all the way to the United States, like almost all continents represented. So thank you so much for making the effort to be here, for sharing your insights. We'll make sure to share the slides, the presentations, and any resources that were mentioned with all of you afterwards as well. Also, big thanks to Sil, our colleague, who's been really crucial in like organizing this session and bringing everyone together. And Sil, if I can ask you to go to the last slide. We, of course, also still have an evaluation for ourselves. This is the closing of a learning series of 3 parts. So whether you were here today for the first time, whether you've attended multiple sessions, we would really like to understand how our activities for this strategic partnership learning track, how you evaluate it, but also how you can use it in your own work and what the results are. So please, if you have time, take some time to fill out the survey that we have. We'll share it in the link in the chat and also through the QR code here, and we'll share it with you afterwards as well. This will really help us as well to learn and see what we can do better next time. And on the bottom of the slide, you can also see our save the date for the Bartels Innovation Impulse, which will be an in-person event in the Netherlands, in Rotterdam, where we'll bring together innovators within the sector and see how we can give innovation in international development an impulse. So block it in your calendar if you would like to join. It will be a very inspiring day as well. That was all for our side. Thank you so much for participating. As said, we'll follow up with the slide and a recap of this session. And we really hope to see you on the next event. So have a great rest of the day.